The soft murmur of conversations filled the elegant lounge at the Winston Grand Hotel, where exclusive guests lounged in oversized leather chairs, sipping cocktails beneath chandeliers that sparkled like constellations. Jayla Turner, dressed in a tailored navy blazer, sat quietly by the window, a folder in her lap, mentally preparing for the biggest presentation of her career. This hotel was meant to be a refuge, a temporary oasis before the storm of business meetings that awaited her. But that illusion shattered in an instant. "You need to leave," a sharp voice cut through the air like a knife. Jayla looked up, startled. Standing over her was Rachel Harper, the hotel's manager. She wore a pristine suit and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The tone of her voice wasn't a request. It was a command. "This area is for exclusive guests only," Rachel said, her gaze sweeping over Jayla with thinly veiled disdain. "You're not supposed to be here." The lounge fell silent, heads turned, and a few whispers flickered through the room like static electricity. Jayla blinked, her pulse quickening. "Excuse me?" she said, keeping her voice calm though her heart was pounding. "You heard me," Rachel said, folding her arms. "This lounge is reserved for our most valued clientele. You need to leave." A flush of heat spread through Jayla's chest. Her fingers tightened around the folder in her lap. "I'm a paying guest," Jayla said, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "I have every right to be here." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "We've had complaints," she said with a dismissive wave. "You're making the other guests uncomfortable." Jayla's jaw tightened. Complaints? Uncomfortable? She had done nothing but sit quietly since she arrived. This wasn't about noise or rules, it was something else entirely. She'd seen this before, felt this before. The unspoken message that she didn't belong. "What exactly have I done to make anyone uncomfortable?" Jayla asked, her eyes locked on Rachel's. Rachel hesitated for a moment, her facade cracking slightly, before regaining her composure. "You're disrupting the atmosphere," she said coolly. "And if you don't leave, I'll have no choice but to call security." The threat hung in the air, heavy and unjust. Jayla could feel every pair of eyes in the room on her, waiting for her to react. For a moment she considered walking away, avoiding the conflict, brushing it off like she had so many times before. But this time felt different. This time it wasn't just about her. "Call them," Jayla said, leaning back in her chair. "I'll wait." The silence in the lounge was deafening. Rachel's lips thinned into a line. She hadn't expected resistance. Without another word, she spun on her heel and marched toward the front desk. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, some pretending not to notice, others eagerly watching the drama unfold. Jayla's hands trembled slightly, though her face remained calm. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She wasn't the type to cause a scene, but this was different. She glanced toward the entrance, her instincts telling her that something bigger was about to happen. Her breath hitched slightly as she watched Rachel speak to a security guard. The guard nodded once and began walking toward her. 1,000 thoughts raced through Jayla's mind, but one stood out above the rest. Not this time. She had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to be treated like this. The security guard loomed closer, his expression unreadable. Jayla stayed rooted in her seat, determined not to give them the satisfaction of watching her walk away. The whispers around her grew louder. The tension was thick enough to suffocate. "Have you ever experienced something like this?" the narrator asks. "Share your story in the comments below." The security guard paused a few feet away, casting a cautious glance at Jayla. His posture was firm but not aggressive, a man caught in the middle of something he didn't want to escalate. Rachel reappeared at his side, her eyes locking onto Jayla with the cold satisfaction of someone who thought they had already won. "Ma'am," Rachel said, folding her arms, "I've asked you politely to leave the lounge. Since you've refused, I'm afraid we'll have to escort you out." "Escort me out?" Jayla felt her pulse throb in her ears. Her fingers curled into her palms as she took a slow, steady breath, willing herself to stay composed. Not here, not in front of them. Around her, the crowd had grown thicker. Some guests whispered behind raised hands, eyes darting between Jayla and the staff. Others openly stared, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and judgment. But no one spoke up, not a single voice in her defense. It was a feeling Jayla knew all too well. She had grown up in neighborhoods where people like her had to fight twice as hard to prove their worth. Raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over their heads, Jayla learned the value of resilience at a young age. Every opportunity she had was earned through sweat, determination, and sacrifice. But despite her success, there were always moments like this, moments where the world reminded her that, in some people's eyes, she still didn't belong. This was supposed to be different. This wasn't just another hotel stay. Jayla had been invited to an exclusive business conference for rising entrepreneurs. It was a chance to expand her network, land potential investors, and take her business to the next level. It had taken her years of hard work to get here, years of long nights, rejection after rejection, and moments when giving up seemed easier than pushing forward. And now, one woman's prejudice threatened to tear it all down. "Wait," Jayla said, her voice steady but filled with an unmistakable edge. "Why am I being singled out? What have I done wrong?" Rachel didn't flinch. "It's not personal," she said with a shrug. "We just want to maintain a certain ambiance in the lounge." "Ambience?" Jayla's stomach twisted. She knew exactly what Rachel meant. Rachel didn't see a young, accomplished businesswoman preparing for the next big step in her career. She didn't see someone who had clawed her way through obstacles most couldn't imagine. All Rachel saw was a black woman in an expensive lounge, and in her mind, that didn't fit the image the hotel wanted to project. Jayla had spent her life breaking through doors that others tried to close in her face. Today wouldn't be any different. "I'm not leaving," Jayla said, her voice calm but firm. "I am a paying guest, and I have every right to be here." Rachel's smile thinned, her eyes darkening. "Fine," she said, stepping back. "Have it your way." The security guard took a step closer. Jayla braced herself, heart pounding, expecting him to grab her arm and drag her out at any second. But before he could act, a man in a tailored suit, the hotel's general manager, appeared at Rachel's side. He whispered something in her ear, his brow furrowed with concern. Rachel stiffened, then shot a glare at Jayla before turning toward the general manager. "Are you sure?" Rachel hissed, barely loud enough for Jayla to hear. "We have policies." The manager cut her off with a curt nod. "Yes, handle this carefully." Rachel hesitated, her confidence faltering for the first time. She gave Jayla one last withering look before turning on her heel and walking briskly back toward the front desk. The security guard followed her without a word. Jayla remained seated, refusing to let her expression betray the mixture of relief and rage boiling inside her. She could still feel the weight of the stairs around her, the unspoken judgment hanging in the air like smoke. She reached for her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found the one name she needed. For a split second, her thumb hovered over the call button. Should I do it? She knew she could handle this on her own. She always had. But something about this moment felt bigger, heavier than anything she had faced before. Her finger pressed the button. The phone rang once, twice, and then a familiar voice answered. "Jayla?" Her heart skipped a beat at the sound of her mother's voice, steady, calm, and strong as ever. "Mom," Jayla said, her voice barely a whisper. "I need your help." The phone call was brief, but heavy with purpose. Jayla's mother, Ava Turner, didn't ask unnecessary questions. She didn't need to. The moment Jayla's voice wavered, Ava knew something serious had happened. "Stay where you are," Ava said firmly. "I'll be there soon." As the call ended, Jayla slipped her phone into her pocket, feeling a newfound steadiness. Around her, the air buzzed with quiet whispers. Some guests pretended not to notice the confrontation, while others openly watched with judgmental eyes. The tension was thick, suffocating. Rachel reappeared moments later, flanked by 2 more security guards. Her posture was rigid, her expression colder than ever. She scanned the room, her eyes locking onto Jayla like a predator eyeing its prey. "You've left us no choice," Rachel said, her voice louder now, enough to ensure everyone in the lounge could hear. "Security will escort you off the premises. We can't have guests disturbing the peace." The words hung in the air like a public indictment. Jayla blinked, refusing to let the rising humiliation show on her face. Her fingers curled into fists at her sides, but she remained seated, her chin held high. "Disturbing the peace?" she asked, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "I'm sitting in a chair. I haven't said a word to anyone. How exactly am I disturbing the peace?" Rachel crossed her arms, her lips curling into a thin smile. "It's not just about what you've done, it's about how you make others feel." A gasp rippled through the lounge. Jayla's stomach tightened. There it was, the unspoken truth laid bare for all to see. Rachel didn't care about rules or fairness, she cared about appearances. In her mind, Jayla's presence disrupted the perfect polished image the hotel tried so hard to maintain. The crowd sensed it too. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding Jayla's gaze. Others whispered in hushed tones, their eyes darting back and forth between her and Rachel. The security guard stepped closer. Jayla knew she could push back harder, demand to speak with the general manager or call for a lawyer, but she also knew that wouldn't solve anything. Not here, not now. Instead, she straightened in her seat and said one word, her voice steady as a rock. "No." Rachel's eyes flashed with anger. "Excuse me?" "No," Jayla repeated. "I'm not going anywhere. Not until I speak to someone in charge. Someone who understands that paying guests have rights, no matter how they look." A murmur swept through the crowd. The security guards hesitated, their eyes flicking toward Rachel for direction. Rachel's face darkened. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she snapped. "I'm trying to be reasonable, but if you don't leave right now, we'll have no choice but to remove you by force." Jayla didn't flinch. She crossed her arms, her gaze locked onto Rachel's. "Then do it," she said. "Drag me out in front of all these people. Let them see exactly how you treat your guests." The room fell silent. Rachel hesitated for the first time. Her eyes flicked toward the crowd, and for a moment, Jayla saw the faintest hint of doubt cross her face. She had been counting on Jayla to crumble, to beg or retreat, but that wasn't going to happen. Not today. Before Rachel could respond, the glass doors of the lounge swung open with a sharp hiss. A commanding figure strode into the room, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a metronome marking the rhythm of power. Jayla turned, her breath catching in her throat. It was her mother. Ava Turner wasn't just a parent, she was a force of nature. Tall, elegant, and poised, she carried an air of authority that demanded attention. Her tailored suit spoke of power, her stride radiated confidence, and her eyes locked onto Rachel with a calm intensity that sent a chill down the room's spine. The transformation in the room was instantaneous. The curious onlookers leaned forward, their whispers turning into stunned silence. The security guards exchanged nervous glances, instinctively stepping back as Ava approached. Rachel's smug expression faltered. Her confident posture sagged ever so slightly, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. "May I help you?" Rachel asked, her voice struggling to maintain its usual firmness. Ava stopped directly in front of her. "Yes," she said, her tone deceptively calm. "I believe you've made a mistake." Rachel blinked, clearly thrown off. I don't think so." This woman was causing a disturbance. Ava raised a hand, cutting her off with a gesture that was both polite and commanding. "I wasn't finished. Her voice dropped lower, colder. "You see, this isn't just any guest you've been harassing. This is my daughter." Gasps rippled through the lounge. "Her daughter?" someone whispered. Rachel's face drained of color. She took a small step back, her eyes darting toward the security guards as if silently pleading for help. "And if you had taken a moment to look past your assumptions," Ava continued, her voice now laced with steel, "you might have realized that you've crossed a line you cannot uncross." The room was so silent that Jayla could hear the ticking of the ornate clock mounted on the far wall. Ava turned to the security guards, her expression softening just a fraction. "Gentlemen, I suggest you take a step back. You won't be needing your services here." The guards hesitated for a split second before nodding and retreating to the edges of the lounge. Rachel opened her mouth, searching for words, but none came. Her earlier confidence was gone, replaced by something closer to panic. "Perhaps we should move this conversation somewhere more private," Rachel stammered, her voice barely audible. Ava's eyes narrowed. "Oh no, I think we should continue right here. After all, you seemed perfectly comfortable with an audience when you humiliated my daughter. Let's not deprive them of the conclusion." The silence was deafening. Rachel stood frozen, her pulse pounding in her ears as Ava's words echoed through the lounge. Guests whispered among themselves, eyes wide with disbelief. The commanding woman before them was not just another upset customer, she was someone important, very important. Jayla stayed seated, her gaze unwavering, her calm confidence growing now that her mother had arrived. She didn't have to speak anymore. Ava had taken over, and everyone in the room could feel the power radiating from her. Rachel's throat went dry. I had no idea," she stammered, attempting to regain her footing. "Had I known she was connected, this would have been handled differently." Ava's eyes narrowed, her expression hardening. "Connected?" she repeated, her voice deceptively soft. "Is that how you justify your behavior? You treat my daughter like a criminal until you discover who she knows?" Rachel opened her mouth to respond, but Ava didn't give her the chance. "Let me make this clear," Ava continued, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "Jayla isn't deserving of respect because of who she's related to. She deserves respect because she's a human being and a paying guest, just like everyone else in this establishment." The words hit like a hammer. Rachel shrank under the weight of Ava's unwavering gaze. The crowd, sensing the shift in power, began murmuring louder. Even those who had remained indifferent were now leaning in, fully engrossed. A few pulled out their phones, recording the confrontation, because something told them this moment was far from over. Ava turned slightly, addressing the security guards. "Gentlemen, let me ask you something. Did you witness my daughter causing a disturbance?" The guards exchanged uncomfortable glances. Finally, one of them cleared his throat. "No, ma'am. She was just sitting in the lounge." "I see," Ava said, her voice calm but sharp. She turned back to Rachel. "Then tell me, Ms. Harper, what exactly prompted you to call security on my daughter?" Rachel's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling fast. I thought she was trespassing," Rachel said weakly. "She didn't look like our typical guests." Gasps filled the room. The unspoken truth was finally said aloud. Ava's expression didn't change, but the intensity in her eyes grew colder. "Didn't look like our typical guests?" she repeated, each word deliberate and heavy. "And what exactly does that mean, Ms. Harper?" Rachel knew she was trapped. The weight of the crowd's judgment pressed down on her, and there was no way out. I didn't mean it like that," she said, her voice trembling. "It was just a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding?" Ava took a step closer, her presence towering over Rachel. "Misunderstandings happen when someone gives the wrong room number or orders the wrong drink at the bar. What you did was not a misunderstanding. It was discrimination. You assumed my daughter didn't belong here because of how she looks, and you acted on that assumption." Rachel's face turned crimson. She opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught in her throat. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, their expressions a mix of outrage and disgust. One woman near the back shook her head, whispering to her companion, "I can't believe this is happening. It's 2025 and we're still dealing with this nonsense." Another man stepped forward, his voice firm. "She's right. I've been coming to this hotel for years, and I've seen how they treat certain guests differently. It's about time someone called them out." Ava heard the growing support and knew it was time to deliver the final blow. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "Miss Harper, do you know who I am?" Rachel shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "I am Ava Turner," Ava said, her voice steady and full of authority. "Founder and CEO of Turner Hospitality Group, one of the largest hotel consulting firms in the country. My team works closely with luxury hotels to ensure they meet the highest standards of customer service and inclusivity." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Even Jayla's eyes widened in surprise. Ava had never been one to flaunt her power, but in this moment, it was necessary. "In fact," Ava continued, "I've had several meetings with the ownership of this hotel about improving their guest experience. Looks like we still have a long way to go." Rachel took a step back, her face pale. I didn't know," she stammered. "If I had known—" "It wouldn't have mattered," Ava interrupted, "because you shouldn't have to know someone's title to treat them with basic respect." The room fell silent again, Ava's words hanging in the air like a heavy curtain. Rachel Harper's mask of superiority had officially shattered. Ava turned to the crowd, her gaze sweeping over the onlookers. "Let this be a lesson," she said. "We have a responsibility to call out injustice when we see it, not to stand by silently and let it happen. We must hold each other accountable, especially in spaces like these." The crowd nodded in agreement, their murmurs turning into supportive comments. Some began clapping softly, a sign that they were with her. Ava turned back to Rachel, her voice softer but no less firm. "I'll be speaking with your general manager shortly. I expect a formal review of your behavior and a public apology to my daughter. And trust me when I say, if real changes aren't made, you'll be hearing from my legal team." Rachel could only nod, her face a mask of defeat. Jayla, watching all of this unfold, felt a surge of pride and relief. Her mother had handled the situation with grace and power, turning the tables in a way that no one could have anticipated. As Ava turned to leave, she placed a hand on Jayla's shoulder. "Let's go," she said softly. "We've made our point." Jayla nodded, her heart lighter than it had been all day. They walked out of the lounge together, leaving Rachel to face the consequences of her actions. The weight of silence hung in the air as Ava and Jayla walked out of the lounge, their footsteps echoing across the polished marble floor. Behind them, Rachel stood frozen, her once proud posture crumbling beneath the eyes of every guest in the room. The murmurs started softly at first, a quiet wave of disbelief rippling through the crowd. Then, the whispers grew louder. "Did you hear what she said? Ava Turner. She owns a consulting firm that works with hotels like this. She's a big deal. Rachel is done for." Rachel could feel the heat of their stares pressing down on her. Her chest tightened, panic rising in her throat. She had built her reputation on control, on commanding respect or at least fear from the staff and guests at the hotel. Now, all of that was slipping through her fingers like sand. One guest leaned toward another. "You'd think someone working in hospitality would know better than to treat people like that." "It's about time someone stood up to her," the other replied with a nod. Rachel tried to steady herself, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She turned to one of the security guards, her voice trembling but desperate to maintain authority. "Call the general manager," she said. "We need to control this situation." The guard hesitated, glancing toward the departing figures of Ava and Jayla. He had seen enough to know that Rachel's authority was hanging by a thread. "I think it's best you handle this yourself," he said carefully, stepping back. Rachel's heart sank. Even her staff was distancing themselves from her now. She could almost feel the ground shifting beneath her feet, and she knew that what came next wouldn't be in her favor. Meanwhile, Ava and Jayla walked down the hallway toward the main lobby. Jayla exhaled slowly, her pulse finally starting to settle. "Mom, I can't believe how you handled that," she said, her voice filled with awe. "Thank you. I felt so helpless back there." Ava stopped and placed a reassuring hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You were never helpless, Jayla," she said firmly. "You stood your ground, and that's what matters. I was just here to make sure the right people heard you." The pride in Ava's voice gave Jayla a sense of calm she hadn't felt since the confrontation began. For a brief moment, the world seemed to settle back into place. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Ava's phone buzzed. She glanced down at the screen and saw a message from William Reynolds, the regional director for the hotel chain. The message was brief but direct. "Just heard what happened. I'm on my way." Ava smiled knowingly. The tide was about to turn even further. Back in the lounge, the tension had only grown thicker. Rachel paced, casting glances toward the entrance every few seconds. She knew she had little time before someone from upper management arrived. Her thoughts raced, desperately trying to formulate an explanation that could save her. But deep down, she knew no explanation could undo what had just happened, not with so many witnesses, not with so many phones recording. Just as she began to compose herself, William Reynolds entered the lounge. His presence was commanding yet calm, the kind of calm that carried more weight than any shout ever could. His sharp eyes swept across the room, taking in the lingering tension, the uncomfortable guests, and finally, Rachel. "Rachel." "Ms. Harper," he said, his voice steady but firm. "A word." Rachel nodded stiffly and followed him toward the corner of the lounge, her pulse pounding in her ears. "I've just spoken with Ms. Turner," William began, his voice calm but deadly serious. "I've also reviewed several reports from your staff about similar incidents in the past. Would you care to explain?" Rachel's mouth opened, but no words came out. She could see the judgment in William's eyes, the finality of it. "I trusted you to represent this hotel with integrity and respect," he continued. "What you've done today is not only unacceptable, it's unforgivable." Rachel's lips trembled. I didn't mean for it to escalate like this," she whispered. "I made a mistake, but I can make it right." William's gaze didn't waver. "The damage is already done. This hotel's reputation is on the line because of your actions. You've left me with no choice." Rachel's knees felt weak. "No choice?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. William nodded. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties. Security will escort you to collect your belongings." A collective gasp swept through the lounge. Rachel's face turned pale, her once confided facade completely shattered. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Give me another chance. I'll do better, I swear." William's expression didn't change. "We've given you enough chances, Rachel. This isn't just about today. It's about a pattern of behavior that can no longer be ignored." Rachel looked around, hoping for someone to step in and defend her. But no one spoke up. No one came to her rescue. Not this time. The security guards approached, their presence quiet but firm. "Ms. Harper," one of them said gently, "it's time to go." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but she knew there was no way out. Her career, her reputation, it was all crumbling around her. She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and walked toward the exit with as much dignity as she could muster. The guests watched in silence, their expressions a mix of relief and satisfaction. In the lobby, Ava and Jayla stood together, watching the scene unfold from a distance. "Is it over?" Jayla asked softly. Ava nodded. "For now, but this is just the beginning." Jayla turned to her mother, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you for standing up for me. I'll never forget this." Ava smiled, wrapping an arm around her daughter. "We stand up for each other, Jayla, always." The tension in the air finally began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of triumph and renewal. For the first time in hours, Jayla felt like she could breathe again. As Rachel Harper was escorted out of the hotel, the reality of her situation finally hit her with full force. The murmurs of guests filled the air, phones discreetly held up to capture the moment. Some were texting furiously, while others were already posting videos online with captions like, "Justice served," and "Racist manager finally gets what's coming." Rachel's eyes darted around frantically, her breath quick and shallow. How had it all unraveled so quickly? One minute she was in control, dictating who was worthy of staying in the exclusive lounge. The next, she was the center of a scandal that would soon spread beyond the hotel's walls. By the time she stepped out onto the street, her phone buzzed relentlessly in her pocket. Notifications from news alerts, messages from colleagues, and missed calls from higher-ups all blurred together. Her social media feeds had already exploded with comments from strangers calling her out. "Disgusting behavior. There's no place for people like her in hospitality." "Karma caught up with you, Rachel." "Good riddance." Rachel's legs wobbled as she walked toward the parking lot, her mind spinning. She could almost feel her carefully built career crumbling beneath her feet. This wasn't just a bad day at work. This was the end of everything she had worked for. Meanwhile, back in the lounge, the atmosphere had completely shifted. Ava and Jayla stood in the center of the room, surrounded by guests and staff. What had started as a moment of humiliation for Jayla had transformed into something powerful, a moment of vindication and justice. The regional director, William Reynolds, approached Ava with a sincere expression. "Ms. Turner, I deeply apologize for everything you and your daughter endured today. We take full responsibility for what happened, and immediate steps will be taken to ensure nothing like this ever happens again." Ava nodded, her calm demeanor unwavering. "I appreciate that, Mr. Reynolds, but an apology isn't enough. This incident reflects a deeper problem, one that needs more than just words to fix." William looked thoughtful for a moment, then spoke again. "You're right. Would you be willing to consult with us on implementing new policies for staff training and guest relations? We could use someone with your expertise to help us make real change." Ava glanced at Jayla, who gave her a small, encouraging smile. "I'd be happy to help," Ava said, "but only if you're serious about creating an environment where every guest feels welcome, no exceptions." "We are," William assured her, "starting today." Outside the hotel, news of the incident spread like wildfire. Local news outlets picked up the story, plastering Rachel Harper's name and face across their headlines. Exclusive hotel manager fired for discrimination against black guest. Caught on camera, hotel manager learns the hard way. The video of the confrontation had gone viral within hours. Comments flooded in, with people sharing their own stories of discrimination and injustice. "This reminds me of what happened to my cousin last year. Glad to see someone fighting back. We need more people like Ava Turner in this world." Justice was served, finally. Rachel's downfall wasn't just a personal defeat, it became a public lesson on the consequences of prejudice and entitlement. For many, it was a moment of vindication and proof that change was possible. Back inside the hotel, Ava and Jayla sat together in the lounge, finally able to relax. The tension that had hung over them all day had dissipated, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph. "I didn't expect things to unfold like that," Jayla admitted, sipping her water. Ava chuckled softly. "Neither did I. But when someone tries to make you feel small, you stand your ground. That's what we do." Jayla nodded, her eyes brimming with admiration for her mother. "I'll remember that." The lounge around them had returned to its usual calm elegance, but it felt different now, like a place where they truly belonged. For Ava, this was more than just a victory. It was a reminder that sometimes the only way to bring about change was to confront injustice head-on. She had stood up, spoken out, and made sure her daughter knew that no one had the right to tell her where she did or didn't belong. And, perhaps most importantly, Ava knew that this wasn't just the end of a difficult day. It was the beginning of something better. The next morning, the lobby of the majestic Crown Hotel felt different. The usual hum of activity was there, guests checking in, staff hurrying around with luggage carts. But beneath the surface, a tension lingered. Every employee was keenly aware of the events from the day before, and the air crackled with nervous energy. Jayla stepped out of the elevator, her heels clicking softly on the polished marble floor. She had barely gotten a few steps into the lobby when she noticed heads turning, whispers quickly spreading among the staff. Some hotel employees looked down when they saw her, their eyes filled with embarrassment and guilt. Others offered cautious smiles, hoping to distance themselves from Rachel's actions. A new manager, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a professional demeanor, stood near the front desk, speaking to a small group of employees. Jayla caught snippets of the conversation. This isn't just a policy change. It's about ensuring everyone who walks through these doors feels valued and respected. No exceptions. The new manager's words carried a sense of hope and resolve that felt like a fresh start for the hotel. Jayla's heart lifted a little. Maybe this would be the beginning of something better. Then she saw her mother standing near the front desk, engaged in a serious conversation with William Reynolds, the hotel's general manager. He looked far more humble and attentive than he had the day before. His usual air of superiority was gone, replaced by a thoughtful expression. Ava noticed Jayla approaching and gave her a warm smile, nodding slightly, a silent signal that everything was under control. Jayla joined them, her confidence restored. "Miss Turner," William said, his voice respectful but tinged with regret. "I want to personally apologize for everything that happened. There is no excuse for how you were treated. We failed you, and for that, I am truly sorry." Jayla crossed her arms, her expression calm but firm. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a reflection of something deeper. You need to do better, not just for me, but for every guest who walks through those doors. William nodded solemnly. "You're right. We've already begun implementing changes. Rachel is no longer with us, and we're launching a comprehensive training program for all staff. This hotel will be a place where everyone feels welcome." Ava raised an eyebrow. "We'll be watching to make sure those changes stick." The words hung in the air, not as a threat but as a promise, a vow to hold them accountable. William extended his hand. "Thank you for your patience and your strength. You've inspired us to be better." Jayla hesitated for a moment before shaking his hand. "I hope so." With that, the conversation ended, and Jayla and Ava turned toward the doors, ready to leave the hotel behind. But just as they reached the exit, a voice called out behind them. It was one of the front desk clerks, a young woman who had been there during the confrontation with Rachel. She stepped forward nervously, her hands twisting together. "Ms. Turner," she said hesitantly, "I just wanted to say thank you for standing up for yourself, for standing up for all of us. I should have said something yesterday, but I didn't. I'm sorry for that." Jayla paused, her expression softening. "It's never too late to do the right thing. Thank you for saying something now." The clerk smiled, visibly relieved. "You made a difference, more than you know." Jayla nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. Sometimes, change started with one voice, one person refusing to accept what was wrong, and that voice could inspire others to find their courage, too. As they stepped out into the crisp morning air, Jayla felt a wave of relief wash over her. The city buzzed around them, cars honking, pedestrians chatting, but for the first time since this ordeal began, everything felt right again. She turned to her mother, who looked at her with pride. "Mom, thank you for everything," Jayla said softly. "I couldn't have done this without you." Ava smiled, wrapping an arm around her daughter's shoulders. You didn't need me to fight this battle for you. You already had everything you needed. You just needed someone to remind you of how powerful you are. Jayla laughed softly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Well, I guess it helps to have a mother who's not afraid to take on the world. We take on the world together, Ava corrected gently. And remember, you belong in every room you walk into. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise. Jayla nodded, absorbing her mother's words like a mantra. A week after the incident, Jayla sat in her apartment, scrolling through her emails. Among the usual business inquiries and updates, one message stood out. It was from an executive at the hotel chain's corporate office. She opened the email and quickly skimmed its contents. Her eyes widened as she read. Dear Miss Turner, we are deeply sorry for the experience you had at the Majestic Crown Hotel. We recognize that what happened was unacceptable, and we're committed to ensuring it never happens again. As a gesture of our sincere apology, we would like to invite you to be part of an advisory board that will help us shape new policies and initiatives for diversity and inclusion across all our properties. Your voice is important, and we believe you can help us make meaningful change. Jayla's heart skipped a beat. She never expected anything like this. This wasn't just an apology, it was an opportunity to influence real change. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was Ava. Hey, sweetheart, her mother said. Did you check your email? Yeah, I just read it. What do you think? I think they're finally listening, and I think you should say yes. Jayla smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. In the end, this experience wasn't just about a single act of prejudice. It was about the power of standing up, speaking out, and refusing to be silenced. Jayla learned that strength doesn't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes it's in the quiet but unwavering refusal to accept less than what you deserve. Her mother's words stayed with her. You belong in every room you walk into. And now Jayla would help ensure that no one else would ever feel like they didn't belong. If you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that subscribe button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Together we can create a world where everyone belongs. See you in the next one.